Welcome everybody to today's webinar from the Open Group. This event is kindly being brought to us by a membership organisation, Orbis Software. Before I hand over to our speaker, Peter Harrod, I'd just like to cover off a few housekeeping issues. We would like these events to be as interactive as we possibly can. We would encourage you to ask questions. The best way to submit a question is to use QA text facility in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. If you want to submit a question via that text facility, if you address your questions to all, that way everyone gets to see the questions being submitted. Event is also being recorded, so if for any reason you have to leave early, or if you experience any local technical problems, you will be able to review a complete recording, both video and audio of this event from tomorrow, and you will receive an email with the necessary link to where you can access that recording. I think without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Peter to begin his presentation. Peter, ready? Please go ahead.
Excellent. Okay, so can everyone hear me okay? Coming through okay, Simon?
You're nice and clear, Peter.
Excellent. Okay, well, thanks to everyone for attending, and thanks especially to the Open Group for allowing me to give this webinar. Let me first of all talk about what I'll be covering during the session. I work with Orbis Software, which is one of the tools vendors that is in the market, particularly based around Vue, the products called iServer. And doing some on-site work with a customer in the first quarter of 2011, struck by a particularly innovative approach they were taking towards application portfolio management, and in particular they were borrowing from EA techniques, between TOGAF. So based on that, I decided to create this webinar, which we gave a few months ago to the UK and US time zones, and so now, by demand, we're repeating it at a more accessible time for Australasia and the West Coast. So first of all, obviously, I don't want to be creating a seminar on TOGAF, and I suspect a lot of what we'll cover off on the top side will be, bread and butter, meat and potatoes to a lot of people attending. But just so that we've got a common grounding to proceed from, I'll start off going over key points of TOGAF, particularly as they apply to the discussion today, and then consider application portfolio management, what its roles are, key disciplines are in it. Before I move on to the key highlight of this webinar, which is how some of the techniques in TOGAF can support application portfolio management. Consider a couple of challenges involved in using this approach before we open up the floor to questions and conclusions. So let's briefly cover what is TOGAF. So TOGAF, it's a framework for engaging in one of your enterprise architectures by a variety of different elements. Most famous part of TOGAF, the iconic picture of it is shown in this particular slide, the architecture development methodology. A set of so you can go through, define where you are, where you want to be, and how do you get from the current state to the future state. And then, architecture development methodology is supplemented by a variety of techniques that TOGAF outlines. Use of principles, architecture patterns, stakeholder management, gap analysis, and so on. And we'll in a moment how some of these techniques directly fit into use in the APM environment. Element that TOGAF does. So it's borrowed from IEEE 1471, the idea of viewpoints to address different concerns that different stakeholders have. Thinking that different participants in the process, different stakeholders in AI modeling make concerns, and simply creating one model may answer all of the questions of all of your stakeholders. Better to create windows, if you like, viewpoints onto your model, quickly addressing specific questions about your architecture with a particular aim that these are answering specific questions that the stakeholders have. Viewpoints are supplemented by a content meta model, object types and the relations that they have. I'm calling it the famous content meta model picture here. The things about TOGAF, a criticism sometimes laid against it is it's detailed in the business architecture as opposed to the technical architecture. But that is deliberate. What particular in what TOGAF brings is the distinction between a logical component and a physical component. And it's the idea that you can have logical application components, i.e. a system that does something, as opposed to a physical component, the actual product that you've bought, that functionality. Now, one of the TOGAF specification, the techniques, but I want to revisit it here, the idea of architecture compliance and architecture principles. The idea that architecture has a set of different characteristics, principles they follow. It is something that, along the lines of, we're a false shop, free and open source software is a desired platform. Any software outside of that be retired and replaced with FOSS. Or something as simple as principles, something straight from the TOGAF spec. All principles apply to all elements of the architecture. And the other of these principles is any given architecture, any given segment architecture or part architecture is assessed for compliance with these principles. And TOGAF defines 6 different levels of compliance: irrelevant, consistent, compliant, conformant, full conformant, and non-conformant. With any given architecture can be assessed for whether it's in line with the principles, whether the architecture is accepted or accepted with a waiver, with the intent the architecture is later brought in line with the principles. Then I've considered what are the elements of TOGAF that are particularly relevant for our discussion today. So I want to briefly consider is application portfolio management. As Wikipedia has an opinion, so it attempts to use the lessons of financial portfolio management to justify and measure the financial benefits of each application, etc., etc. Well, in less formal language, application portfolio management, we at Orbis have encountered it, the idea that you catalogue your applications and attempt to rationalize them. Do we all need each of these applications? Is there any overlap, any duplication? Can I buy them? Do we need to be paying this maintenance? Do we need to be paying this cost of support for each of these applications in relation to the benefits we get from that application? Put more simply, are bits of software worth it? Is that with these large organizations that in EA and APM, they've grown time, they've brought in software ad hoc to specific problems. Quite they may have brought in software at the departmental level, even at the team level, specific need. means is that the IT department often have no idea what they've got installed. We have an idea, they don't have time to stop and think, okay, we have these 3 packages which are doing the same thing. And you do end up with these zombie systems where they exist, but nobody into them for 2 years. And he's carrying on being paid for because nobody noticed. Also, they just exist because the data's there and nobody's gone through a program to get them out, which can be valid, but then say $20,000 maintenance a year for a package, that's more questionable. No. A simple point of where you could end up with overlapping applications. We have several regionally based businesses that merge, creating one national organization. Now, each of those businesses, being the same business, is going to set of applications, and because they're the same business, applications are going to be often overlapping, duplicating each other. So the Western region might have one ERP system, and then Atlantic and the Southern States region might have a different ERP vendor installed. When, hey, you've got duplication of data, duplication of maintenance. Not ideal. Line kind of figure is replicated. Simple systems could end up being duplicated. You could end up having conflicting systems. Each system you've got, you've got support costs, you've got the training overhead, you've got the usage overhead. And so this distribution of systems is often quite costly. So with mind, organizations engage in application portfolio management, help them identify where applications overlap or where they are candidates for retirement, that are scored for finality, but also particularly scored against their cost, the number of users they have, technical fit, as in, does this application fit into the overall vision for how our infrastructure works? Based on the technology that we see as our standard platform. So strategic fit. Does the software do something that we see as part of our core business? Is it actually supporting our business functions, or is it something that's crept in? And there are edges out there that can match this information, or at the more basic level, I've seen it done in spreadsheets. They're used to drive the visual scoring of applications. So on the left, we've got an example of how you could show a kind of heat map of applications. For each application, showing alongside it its scoring according to business and technical fit. Or indeed check application. Applications with the red crosses might be ones that are notoriously unhealthy, going down all the time, high costs. As you know, if they're very useful, valuable systems, fair enough. If, on the other hand, they're used by 2 people once a month, why are we spending this time to support them? So in this scoring, application portfolio management efforts, they try and identify candidates for them. And a common way this is by bubble charts, where the different items are plotted on an X and Y axis, and the size of the plot, the size of the bubble, and are driven by other scoring. Here, the healthy applications are green, the medium applications are yellow, and the applications that are dying on a regular basis are shown in red. outlaid what TOGAF is, in particular the TOGAF that are relevant for our discussion, and APM, what is level description, the discipline of application portfolio management. But let's consider now how the two can support each other and interact. Well, key point of enterprise architecture and TOGAF is this idea that you are mapping through business layer, through data, the application, and the technology layer. And the concept model that we earlier provides a preset set of relevant types, of mapping types, allowing you to map through. So the organizational units have plugged, and it's supported by business service via functions and so on. And then business service is supported by an information system service. Is supported by this logical application component, which is implemented by this physical application component. But the thing is, by tracing through, by doing this layer of mapping, this means you've immediately got an indication of whether a particular application is in supporting your business. Because if a given application is supporting 20% of your organizational units, referring, say, 80% of your employees, then that's an indication that this is a pretty critical, pretty strategic application for you. And it's supporting one small organizational unit, or if you can't even identify any processes or any elements of the organization that application is supporting, we all have a strong candidate for retirement with a scoring of 1 out of 5. So the whole idea of TOGAF mapping through the layers immediately provides insights that you can use for your scoring in the application portfolio management arena. Another element of scoring is technical scoring. Apply with our standards. And anyway, I specifically talked about architectural compliance earlier. Consider it. This very approach of scoring a system against your architectural principles, you have made way to assess how compliant a given application is with your technology vision, with your technology platform that you establish. Mechanisms, and particularly the compliance rating mechanisms, directly feed in to an ability to score the application for its compliance with standards and your architectural patterns established. Now the next thing I'm going to consider, I've just mentioned how TOGAF can feed into APM, application portfolio management, but then your APM project can feed directly back into TOGAF. Okay, gone through your APM efforts, you've identified weak applications, ones that are not supporting the business or which are technically non-compliant and you want to move to a better option. So TOGAF just happens to have a methodology defined for a way to migrate from a current state to a desired state. So it tells you bit of identifying the processes that might be affected, what data be affected, and most importantly, a method deriving your migration plans. How do you actually go through this business of retirement? And you'll know processes which corporate functions will need to go through a transition phase because you've done mapping. You've mapped through the business layer, through the application layer. use methodology. But this is naturally going to affect people's budgets. And a variety of people are going to have an opinion, say, about retirements that you want to propose, changes you want to make. So the question of how can you communicate the benefits, how can you provide clarity in what you're proposing, and a business manager who you're using to change his systems, how can they understand how things are going to change for them? Pushback, less people have that comfort factor that's been thought through. Of course, a business manager is not really going to care about which system talks to which system and what kind of technical interface it has. They are going to care about, are there any changes to the business process, training that they need to do their staff. But earlier, TOGAF directly considers the whole idea of stakeholders and addressing their concerns. First, TOGAF finds the technique of stakeholder management. Stakeholders on a grid as to how they can affect you. You can estimate and manage the level of effort you spend on keeping them happy, keeping them involved. Also, there is the viewpoints method, the viewpoints approach that TOGAF has taken from IEEE 1471. You can address the concerns of your stakeholders in your APM project by borrowing directly from and the viewpoints that TOGAF defines, others, the concerns of the different stakeholders who could fail the project or cause problems. Now, the problem is, this is but there are questions in how you implement this. I talked about how you can use the mapping of your business layer down to your data layer and your application layer and your energy layer, theoretically, to provide insight to drive your road applications for your APM modeling. But of course, that does exist. And to leverage this, you do have to have a body of architectural analysis work done already, or have the commitment to do this. Now, in organizations, there will have been some work done on this somewhere. So, looking at this, is there an EA project going on? Maybe you're part of that project as well. What insights the existing has, you can feed APM modeling. So the good is that you are often going to be doing APM in conjunction with enterprise architecture modeling. The question is the same team? More likely they're different teams. Maybe in the same department, same reporting line. We are working on separate directives. It becomes important to understand who's doing what. You want to start mapping through from which applications are supporting which business processes, which organizational units. You're duplicating what the EM are doing, and especially don't want to be conflicting with what they're doing. It's important to figure out how you're going to keep the teams, how you're going to keep in overlapping modeling, like in sync. And the way that we've seen it work is via a repository. Well, effort, maybe I'll share, or a SharePoint site could work. realistically, when it goes enterprise-wide, you are looking at probably some kind of modeling tool. The synergies and definite benefits that you can borrow from TOGAF into APM and back again. So you be aware that it's not some magic silver bullet. It's a level of coordinating, a level of borrowing from each other that has managed. So, in conclusion, then, that we away from this project that we worked on is that the disciplines in APM and TOGAF feed each other and can support each other. Of architecture compliance review to aid in scoring of applications for technical fitness. Mapping through to supported business processes, business units to help you understand the level of support that an application is giving to the business to help you score it for its business fit. This stakeholder review, particularly the use of viewpoints to address different concerns of your stakeholders. TOGAF, but equally valid for APM, to gain acceptance, to help flush out objections, to ensure that everyone in the organisation view, or at least had their say. The use of the ADM to plot your migration. How are you going to retire these applications? What dependencies are there? How are you going to group them into work packages to move this whole thing forward? And because of this synergy, it means the two disciplines can cooperate, work together, and bring benefits to each other. So, at this point, I've concluded the slide deck presentation I wanted to give. In addition, the slide deck is available from the Orbis software website. There are also a couple of useful TOGAF goodies there that you can download. So I'm going to turn the floor over for questions, and I can see that we've had a couple of questions already.
That, Peter, many thanks. A very clear and concise presentation there, as usual. Yeah, I already have a few questions, and if you would like to submit a question, everyone, the best way to do that is via the QA facility, the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, and if you can make your question addressed to all, that way everyone gets to see all the questions that have been submitted. So I'll start with the first one, Peter. We have a question from Margaret Codner, and she's asking, are there particular artifacts, for example, diagrams, catalogues, matrices, in a server that are useful for APM?
Now, we're moving to our specific tool here. iServer, it's Visio-based. It's a tool with Visio as its front end. And the way it works, without diving into details, you really just have to define the Visio template and the necessary Visio functionality for it. So at APM, we do have the scoring template I used earlier. Just while I try and find my way back here. Unfortunately, WebEx just has numbers for type. Okay. So yes, this is perhaps, as you noticed, one of our Visio templates that we've put together to support APM. We've got bubble chart, landscape, and time maps to support that. But they are just Visio templates. It's just a fact, it's the nature of how our tool particularly works. The templates are on the download site, but let's take a note to check up on that. My colleague Tim from marketing isn't on this session, so I can't with him directly. Ping him an email tomorrow and double check.
Peter. Thank you very much. We have a couple of questions here that I will ask together. Both are with regards to the time spent with engagement of APM. And one specific question is from Salo Bai, asking, managing the required data for APM could be a massive and full-time job. In one government organisation that this person worked for, we had more than 300 applications. In your opinion, Peter, who in the organisation should manage and provide this data?
Really, it needs to be the budget holder or their reports. They won't actually do it. They won't drive it. So I've seen it working is somebody in IT driving it, and they really do have to have the mandate from someone on high, the CIO, ideally. But they are going out to the budget holders, the subject matter experts within IT. They, what does the application do? Who's the expert on it? How do we spend supporting it, and so on. But the figure for 300 applications, it's just slightly less than the number that I was working on in this project. They had 350.
Okay, and so how much time did you specifically spend on that project? Could you give them the people an idea, Peter?
Yeah, that would be about 6 weeks, 3 weeks over 2 months.
Okay, that's good. We have a follow-on question on a similar subject, and this is from. Sorry, I've just let me just find again. This is from Jocelyn McBain. She says, "Thank you, interesting presentation." She goes on to say, "The biggest problem we have found in the realization of apps, the management of records, the apps being decommissioned, how we retain them, keep them accessible in the future, etc." She's asking if you just have any thoughts about the experiences you may have had around this area.
Absolutely. Really, it's one of those things you have to consider. What is the value of the data and how accurate is it? So, first, of course, is are there any legal concerns, regulatory concerns required to keep those records for a certain amount of time due to the history that you're in? If you want that, the next one is keep that information for historical purposes, customer records and so on. They're mapping to the business processes and the business functions that it supports help you, but often are relying on the subject matter expert. It's on a cost-benefit analysis. Are you going to save more by leaving them off in some format that you can interrogate, keeping on the application? Things that you do to keep them. As I say, we did run into a few applications that nothing had entered in for 6 years, and it wasn't anything critical or legally relevant anyway.
Okay, so next question is from Ian McIntosh. Says, you mentioned some packages for scoring applications in APM. Can you allude on the names of those applications, or those scoring applications, Peter?
Mm-hmm. I mean, the one I worked with was Microsoft Project Portfolio Manager, as was. They have been changing the naming of that. I believe now it's called something like Enterprise Portfolio Manager. The other one that I'm aware of is from CompuWare, but not certain of the product name.
That's helpful, thank you. Gelson asks, as part of TOGAF, how APM maintain going forward?
That really touches into how to use your architecture going forward, I would argue. And really just through the same architecture governance mechanisms, the same change management mechanisms that TOGAF lines. So go through your first stage of APM, but the reality is other projects have been going on through that. So APM, it's an iterative process, ideally. Maybe not an endless death march, but certainly something that there's value in going through a few iterations with it, which speaks to the whole iteration approach.
Okay. Ted was asked, can the same APM approach be applied to a technology level for languages, standards, application service databases? What difference might be applied?
It could well be applied in the same manner. APM seems to be a discipline that's become quite popular recently because it's an immediate financial quick win. Borrowers can immediately wrap their heads around the thought of, we might not end up spending as much on maintenance or spending much on support. So, arguably, you could apply that to languages and standards. It's just a bit more difficult to trace through what the costs of supporting them are. Application servers, less so. You do have licensing costs with software, and of course, support costs and keeping skill sets alive. So, of those four in the technology level, I'd say servers and databases, yes, it's not common yet. Language standards, yes, but it will be harder, I'd say, to get buy-in from the business, from the people who control the budgets to do that. It's harder to trace through full of cost involved. You would be.
Along the line of a business case, we have a question from Rakib Ahmed. He's asking, how did you frame the business case and cost-benefit analysis to justify APM? Especially interested in starting from a low base.
Well, that's actually pretty easy because they already had the statistics. This particular organisation spends 60% of its IT budget on supporting existing applications, maintenance and support. And that comes to, if memory serves, about $600 million a year. So simply throwing that figure out at them and saying, well, it will take one FTE working on it for 2 years, even if they manage 1% savings, pays out. So obviously it's much easier to make when you've got a large organisation where that money is being spent on support. So knowing that information and to compare the scale of the expenditure with how much you invested, cost you, even if we only 1/10%, you're still going to be saving a lot of money compared to the time.
Okay, I understand that. Following on from it, I think this is a common issue that many people face, and this is a question from Akia de Glave, and he's asking, do you have any tips on how to persuade business groups which may be allergic to architectures that an approach is worth investing in?
Yep, well, this case for APM is purely you're not spending so much on supporting software, pure and simple. So what I do is explain that, first of all, if IT is not spending all this money supporting redundant systems or systems that aren't used anymore, then you can point out, well, that's money that can be spent on investing, supporting your next new initiative that you want to have. It really is similar to the case that you can make for EA. You really tell horror stories. Did you realize that your department costs us $1 billion a year to support the department? Most business users have no idea of that. It's when you hit them with figures like that, they realize, oh my God, maybe they actually look into, we spend a few months at least looking into how we can reduce that. Then it's good for
Question here from Gregorio Beccaria. Would you aim for both business and technical perspectives what is application fitness and health?
Well, from a technical perspective, I would say application fitness is does the application do what it is supposed to do, and does it integrate well? Is it easy to integrate into the rest of the infrastructure? On a technical application health, what is stability? But then from a business level, application fitness is when new business users come to us and want us to make this small tweak in the application, an application that's got high levels of technical fitness, we actually say that'll take weeks, and where it's got low levels, we laugh in your face. Well, your level of how good a relationship you have with them. For formal organisation, you'd phrase it differently. I was quoting that it was a fairly informal situation. Application health, technical health at the business level is if it's how you've got frustrated because you couldn't get into the application last month. It's got major health problems. It's going down all the time. And there's only so much we can do to prevent it. Just framing it from their perspective, giving them what they want, or rather, not being able to give them what they want because the fitness is low.
Yeah. So with regards to health and fitness, Peter, do you have any formal grading scales or parameters to measure this?
The standards that I've ever been able to find, the usual approach is just to score them on a scale of 1 to 10 or 1 to 5. I have seen people try and score them on a percentage scale, 1 to 100%. But if you decide that something's 72% instead of 71%, scoring 1 to 10 works just as well.
Understand. Got a question from Rajesh Kulkarni. What artifacts, matrices, diagrams are available from Orbis for analysis between current state and future state?
So, in our tool, we do gap analysis via a report, which generates a matrix in the format that TOGAF prescribes. Fortunately, we don't have a Visio plate that you could download for that. Let me think for a second. Yeah, and there's been some discussion about this. We're always interested in ways to do things, but at the moment, we don't have anything that we can offer. It's, as I say, it's an internal report that the tool produces, and with a TOGAF standard for it in terms of formatting.
Question here from Peter Jones, and he asked, we do an APM review of all applications yearly, and he says, is this a reasonable frequency? And he says, we have about 600 applications. He says, our biggest challenge is getting rid of poor-rated apps. He asks, how do you get the organisation to invest in the removal of these applications?
Well, you have to explain the pain, which is to say, if applications are poorly rated, it will presumably mean that either they're not supporting the business, or their technical is low, or they're difficult to integrate. So, telling anecdotes works really well. I once the chief architect of a large insurer in the States explained the way that he closed the board on his architecture. Well, simply he said, you remember the pain we went through to support a payments holiday for Hurricane Katrina? That's why we didn't have enterprise architecture in place. So for retiring applications, where you get resistance, I'm suspecting, is because they don't understand what's the alternative, what's happened to them if the application is retired. Explained the pain. It pointed out, well, the reason why this application is not available 3 days a month is because it's just not fit for purpose at a technical level, and we've rated it and found that out. Explaining, having made this, say, well, okay, so this is what's going to change. these business processes might need to change, or business processes won't need to change at all. Viewpoints approach to try and identify their concerns and then come with a viewpoint to address it. And their TOGAF is quite useful because it's got quite a few viewpoints listed off the shelf.
Just one more question I think we have on the list, Peter, and this is from Samo Rubai, and he's asking, do you have the name of some other application portfolio management software? And he says, I mean a software with a database that can manage application data. Can you help with that at all, Peter?
Other tools that I run across are the Microsoft suite, which was Microsoft PPM, but I think it's EPM now, Enterprise Portfolio Management. And the tool from CompuWare, whose name I'm drawing a mental blank with, but I'm sure if you go to their site and say APM.
Well, that's come to the end of the questions we have. I'd like to thank you again, Peter, for giving this presentation, answering the questions at the end. I'd also like to thank all the people who registered and attended today. I don't know, but this has been the first webinar that the Open Group has put together specifically for the Australasian geography. So we hope to do more in the future moving forward. So with that, I'd like to say thank you to everyone and close the event down. Peter, are you with that?
Absolutely. Just one question.
Well, thank you very again, Peter, and thank you all, and we hope you'll join us again in the future at that Isle event. Thank you.
Okay.